A warm welcome to all our viewers to our series Natural Medicine. Top-class sport on crutches. That's what I'd like to address today, with a scientist who's been dealing with the subject for over 20 years. It's Professor Dr. Elmar Wienecke. He's here today. Welcome, dear Elmar. Thanks. Thanks for coming. Now, we've already done a few programs together about what's known as micronutrient therapy, as you were the first in the world to set up a micronutrient database where I can actually find my individual values and can compare apples with apples for the first time, and can therefore supplement correctly and not just by throwing the dice. Exactly, and I've already explained that I was affected myself. This top sport on crutches was the core of how we started, from a university institution to a corporate structure. Saluto, where we only started with the top athletes, the Olympic champions and European champions. And then I asked, why am I so badly affected myself? What was really wrong with me? I trained very intensively, always went to the physical limits. But you couldn't measure that 30 years ago. You couldn't even measure that at all. And today it's like that. Many don't even know. And I'll say this provocatively, dear viewers, even if you may misunderstand that, every top athlete has the immune system of an AIDS patient. They're extremely vulnerable in extreme situations. We looked after many Olympic candidates who later became Olympic champions, who became ill during intensive training phases because the immune system becomes suppressive. You're extremely vulnerable. And in these phases, you need a lot more micronutrients to give the body what's missing. Because, well, it's like this. Us and also the athlete go to so-called endogenous structural proteins from the bones, from the cartilage substance, which supply energy indirectly with other organs. You can measure this going to the substance. And I just brought you a chart for that. There are so-called pyridinium crosslinks. So what is that? Well, Professor Spitz once told me 20 or 25 years ago, it's the beginning of osteoporosis. In people who had extreme problems, early fractures, whatever, this parameter was sometimes used. And then we started years ago and we said, isn't this parameter also important for us, for athletes or for others to show? Do we have sufficient provisions, or are we going into our structural reserve? And what can we see now? This pyridinium crosslinks is the second morning urine in the morning. It's important now. If I pee 5 times a night, then I won't have the second one. I have to take the second one. Then you see, this is an indicator, the so-called PD value, indicator for cartilage metabolism, and the DPD value for bone metabolism. And what we have found over decades of research, that this mental and physical performance in athletes increases incredibly. And there's even a performance commitment when we exceed certain orders of magnitude. For example, if the PD values are above 85 millimoles per litre of creatinine, I have a very high risk of injury. Or even if the bone metabolism has extremely high values. But what does that mean for us now? You know, top sport at the moment, or competitive and top-level sport, is always a strain at the limit, always. But it's an important structure for our young people. It shows people what can really be achieved. It has a role model function, but the role model function can only be achieved when we give people what is possible. And believe me, 7 years ago, I wrote a book, Top Performance Explosion in Sports, the anti-doping concept. I was very torn apart in public. Is he insane? The anti-doping concept, he gives them something that has nothing to do with doping. The same thing that applies to people also applies to top athletes. We need what we lack. Today, top sport has become its own standard. Absolutely. So, Formula One, always the sport, namely in the Bundesliga. You actually came a long way with this micronutrient supplementation. If I only think of the Leipzig case, where you accompanied them from the 3rd division to the Champions League. Yeah, along with Kurt Marzette's dietary change, all the factors play into it. But what is very important, and that's what I want to show now. Once you see this spectrum, and you can then project it. Well, let's assume you're ambitious. You're not a top athlete. You're fully involved professionally. You're very busy and do 10, 15, 20 hours of training a week. A lot of people do that, and then wonder why they get sick despite the training, get injured despite training, because the body can no longer get what it needs through nutrition. This is still a highly controversial topic in sports medicine worldwide, because there has never been a micronutrient database either. However, we've now just checked our database with these 14,000 competitive athletes that we've examined, categorized which sport, what was the volume, where were the clusters, what kind of problems did they have, and now, in this sports area, we can say exactly what the individual really needs to really keep the immune system stable in order to obtain top performance in the long term. There are also people and athletes who don't hurt themselves because they're simply very resistant by nature, but who completely burn out mentally and physically. One often reads about burnout situations, exhaustion syndrome, very common in athletes, because they lack HS omega-3, for example. We talked about omega-3. If athletes have a low omega-3 index, no communication, no biochemical effect in the brain metabolism, no regeneration possible. Especially here, we also know how important it is. And these are evidence-based studies that Professor von Schacke did, which we also use for ourselves. And that means we have him take all the measurements, but it's also an important point that you just said. I remember from myself, I went jogging 5 to 10 kilometers every day, and suddenly the point came where I had pain in the musculoskeletal system and an exhaustion. I thought, well, now you take a break, but that's not the break at all. It's effective. The body needed more time, and I didn't give it back. Exactly. We were also with Jürgen Klinsmann, an American national team. We examined everything, all athletes. And then when you see how the supply performance is on the cellular level, on the really deeper level in the enterocytes, one is totally shocked. But on the other hand, why should the top athlete be better off than the end user who is diabetic? Everyone has different micronutrient needs, but that's why I'm not allowed to give just anything, but exactly what's missing. I have to measure that, and that's why you see now, I'll show you an example now, and that's really exciting. We have a prevention concept that's unique in Europe. With the handball players at the DHB, the junior internationals, from 2006 to 2013. In total, there were 98 players over a long period of time. And we became world champions twice and European champions twice during this period. We did dental exams, cardiological, internal by the heart and diabetes centre, dental examinations by an institute, sports science and nutritional physiology, and the energy concept. And what am I trying to explain? When these many small facets are brought together, you always succeed. 2009, 2011, world champion. That was the training and competition phase before becoming world champion. I just showed you the pyridinium crosslinks. Just showed the higher values are, the stronger you go to your body's own substance. But what does that mean now? When I have such a high score in the preparatory phase of the World Cup, that was a phase in which not everyone regularly took what was missing. Unfortunately, they didn't do it. And you can see here now, the DPD, the bone metabolism, was relatively high, was in the 15 range. The PD values is the second morning urine, was also relatively high. And this shows that we, the athletes, didn't supply the body with what was missing at the time. Then we checked again, individualized again, supplied via these recipes that pharmacists have put together. We did all that. And now something. Dear viewers, take a look at this. This is what it looked like 4 weeks later. This means that the athletes no longer went to their body's reserves, have not used their cartilage, their bone metabolism, no longer prone to injury. No, mentally higher fitness. Many of the players said that was an important piece of the puzzle for the sport success that we've had. We were fitter in the head, we could regenerate better. And here you can see simply biochemically the body regenerates better. It doesn't touch its basic substance. And for example, many fatigue fractures, some of which can't be explained in athletes, often arise because amounts of micronutrients are really there in the long term, which then leads to an endogenous stress on structural proteins. Imagine it like this. Car has no petrol. If the engine stops, you won't drive any further. The athlete then wants to do sport, can no longer do it, injures themselves. And incidentally, that's how it was with my story. I wanted to become a professional the same way. Repeatedly, the most severe injuries without external influence. without external influence, and this picture documents what it looked like. And now I'll show you a picture that I want to explain. This is now cartilage bone metabolism, but we've already said that the balance between contraction and relaxation, between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, is extremely important. And what we see here now, you see there 144 professional soccer players who took micronutrients in one season, specifically individualized, and in one season not. And we put that together retrospectively. And that means we went to the database, and I also had a thesis to be written there. I really wanted to document what does it actually look like. The thyroid levels have normalized. We talked about this a few times. That has been harmonized. And now you see, dear viewers, you see red, without micronutrients, beginning, and then preparation of the first series, end of the second series. You can see the following here. You can see now the red ones are the players who didn't take any micronutrients, where the micronutrients have even dropped by almost 26%. The amino acids have also decreased by almost 26%. The stress index could not change at all among the players, but in the group who have now taken micronutrients, you can see the influence of the missing micronutrients on the vegetative balance. To date, not a single study has taken place anywhere in the world showing the relationship between 24-hour HRV parameters and micronutrients. But we did it, and here you can see now, stress index goes down, PNN 50 is the break, so the parasympathetic goes up, and the vegetative goes down. That is, this picture shows over a whole season what effects the missing micronutrients had on the vegetative balance of the athletes. And that's what we keep saying, to guide the body into its own regulation. Give what is missing, fill up, shut down, hold. Pre-competition phases, if the stress increases, I need more, so I have to adapt it. Now, there's simply more measured than in popular sport or with us viewers. Where we would perhaps get one measurement or two measurements, a lot more was measured here. And then you basically only see which one, and that's why we have all the knowledge, which we have also gained today in the diabetic area or with other patients from top-class sport. This impairment of the vegetative in the direction of harmonization started there in top-class sport and then transferred to all areas. So that means the future doesn't matter either. I want to give you a small example. I have to be careful now because we have very, very good, we've had top world ranking players with us in tennis, which were placed from 1 to 10, so everything. And there was an athlete with us, I'll define it neutrally, not male and female either, I have to be careful there. They came to me and were number 1 in the world. And sometime, after a 3-week vacation, in November they came to see me. And there we had measured these pyridinium crosslinks, so we measured that, what we just saw there, they were really high after a 3-week holiday. Then I said that at this stage, it was the preparation for the Australian Open next year. I'd start training more moderately to give the body what's missing and then to intensify the training. It was ignored, and 3 weeks later, they had a herniated disc. So that means you could see before that something in the body has led to a dysregulation. They hadn't regenerated from the previous load at all, hadn't regenerated at all. You have to imagine that, because the structural proteins were heavily used. Now comes the next preparation, and then, of course, it's about a lot of money. No question, we all know competitive sport. But then I just have to help to bring the sport in the right direction with the targeted supply. And we were able to document it scientifically, and that's why I wrote the book back then. That was the beginning, now we've come a long way. At that time, it was still called Performance Explosion in Sport, the anti-doping concept. Meanwhile, the results are not out, but completely modified by the latest results. from the stress of the autonomic nervous system. And if you really see that now, then you really know which direction this can go. And then sport makes sense again. And it's also nice to have idols, but idols need to stay healthy. And without the targeted intake and dietary change, important factor glycoplan Kurt Mazetta, it doesn't work anymore. But again, this is really Formula One now, what we see here. And actually, Formula One is also representative of the entire automotive industry, a pioneer. And here we can actually see how Formula One works in medicine and what is to come. But for us consumers, affected amateur athletes, people in general who don't take part in top-class sport, that's exactly one-to-one, exactly equally relevant. Yeah, and what you're saying is very important. Many people who are not top athletes now, but who do top-class sports for their bodies, well, let's take the person who works 70 hours professionally and at the same time still compensates a lot in terms of sport. They often go to their performance limit. So they drive, let's say their VW, like a Porsche. So this person who is not a top athlete does their competitive sport, but does not supply the body with what it needs. Then what does the body do? It will spread signals, either they quit because they've Achilles tendon problems, or whatever, or overexploitation until at some point there's nothing left. Exactly. And that is even the competitive athlete, who's very ambitious but has the same problems as a top athlete, albeit on a completely different level. But that's why I have to measure what's missing, and that unfortunately happens in sport, and unfortunately that is also the doping problem. Many take any substance that they've not even been tested for doping. Of course that doesn't work at all. This is of course fatal. So everything has to be checked individually again, so that it's based on a reputable, or also has a scientific basis. Only a few do that, and that's why it's great. I can remember when I see some athletes who come with tons of amino acids, I say, you can't take them. I don't know, you need to get checked. You have to have it checked to see if they are doping. So just what we do is, it's basically an individualized micronutrient therapy that enables the athlete to tolerate mental and psychological stress better and to get into the sleep phase much better in the long term. In other words, bringing the entire balance of the vegetative nervous system into balance in top athletes, as well as in competitive athletes. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen with most people who have sporting ambitions like me. You basically have to give the body what's missing, then exercise makes sense. Wow. You know, I have a sentence in my head right now. The good Lord thought what a healthy person should look like, with what minerals. It should be provided for everything to work. And then it works. And as soon as we have nutrient deficiencies through the diet, which are undisputably simply there, we know that there are restrictions. And when we do extraordinary things, the overexploitation takes place on the body and we become ill again, or prone to injury, or forced to take a break. What you actually created with this database are ultimately standard values that are simple. I'll just say it, maybe really have some sort of cosmic order. And we should try to stick to it again. And it's possible to compare a 53-year-old man in the database. What are the target values? What are the actual values? And I'll do it, to be honest. Since I've done so much sport, I don't feel so good in my body. There is something. There are some flaws, totally understandable. And if I find that now and get a cocktail with a pill that has everything in it, great. That's medicine of the future. This is Formula One. And you explained it to us wonderfully. Now, with this example Formula One, really great. And that this is really the first page with the database and the micronutrients. It's actually embarrassing. Yeah, because basically you have to say one thing, and that's important again. This is an evidence base where all the data was processed retrospectively. And now it really shows it's in category 1C by medical societies. It's now highly recognized. But because nobody has evaluated the data so far, but now through my students, we also have the opportunity to evaluate things. There'll be many more new results in the near future. Now, let's not get carried away. Ultimately, you don't have a lobby. The micronutrient will not ultimately be carried further because there are no interests. You can't earn anything. There are only laboratory values, and there are supplements that cost next to nothing. And finally, you have a healthy patient. And who should finance that? Who should pay for the fact that people are healthy? Yeah, that's also a good conclusion. There's a very important decision. A well-known researcher once said, health is not the opposite of illness, but the balance of individual life energy. And that's the important thing. We want to stay healthy, stay old with quality of life. And that, if you see it in a very provocative way, is not wanted at all. We could actually, if we understand these mechanisms, if we also integrate these things into the licensing regulations for doctors. Sure, what's been said for 200 years, we know that the environment is more important than the pathogen. And we're actually talking about the environment. And everyone knows, epigenetics also says environment, but nobody listens. And these are conventional medical scientific departments, simply without a lobby again. But now, the question. We have many fathers and mothers at home who say, my child does top-level sport, competitive sport, they're very good, but I also want them to be able to perform at high levels healthily and without injuries. And maybe even a little bit better. They are actually very, very well advised to really accompany the child through the nutrients and the measurement. Yeah, and they have to come to Saluto, because that's not possible through Energy for Health. That has to happen at Saluto because a comprehensive analysis is carried out there. Because basically the athlete who is very ambitious has many, many problem situations. To optimize that, you can help. And then there is always the connection, what you've rightly considered, give what is missing, change your eating habits, then your health will remain stable in the long term. But even the exhausted housewife at home or the exhausted woman in the business or man, it's actually exactly the same. Have measured what's missing, why I don't feel well, and then about the basics, about the basic medicine from the molecules that we were created with. What is missing here? And finally, I have an incredible biochemical reaction up here, which then makes me uncomfortable. We can all do this. And shows like this one, and that's why I like coming, serve me to enlighten, to inform people, and to confront people with the topic. Now, another important note. Yeah, I was just about to do it, because these things can even be looked up, and not in book form. Instead, you go to www.fh-mittelstand.de on this page of the Technical College of Middle Class in Bielefeld. Go to the Research button, and then to the topic publication. There you can access the last 4 issues that we wrote and look at the evidence-based studies for free. There's no problem at all. So that's now for all therapists, including pharmacists, everyone who deals with micronutrient therapy. They can even do a master's degree. They can do a degree at the Technical College of Middle Class, and that's something I like to say, because it's simply of incomprehensible importance for health, for the salutogenesis of life. Such an apprenticeship takes about a year. No, it's a 2-year master's degree. But it is like this. In the first year, the basics are laid. In the second year, there's the master's thesis. But the presence is only 4 to 5 times a year. The rest is online. But it is doable for any doctor who practices and for everyone. But it helps us. We all have to look for multipliers to really further establish the topic. But there'll always be more. I say again, actually, it is the basis for every doctor. Actually, this is the basic tool. You should theoretically build on it. But the system isn't quite that far yet, and these findings, what we can measure today, laboratory technology, wasn't there before. So these are outstanding. Laboratory services were available, and now the database, and to put these values in a meaningful context. Is it also possible to do a doctorate in this course? Yeah, I'm in the process, possibly a Doctor of Public Health. I'm on it right now. I have the book with me, this book. I brought it with me here, The Power of Micronutrients, Milestone in Medicine and Health. With the FAM, I'm currently into creating the opportunity to do a doctorate in this area, so I want to do that too. and this is my personal wish, to help these people who are then still ambitious with a doctorate. Yeah, I think it's important to take care of the reputation to the outside world, and that's certainly also a hook for many of our viewers who like to do further training via QS24. And I've seen that I really have an opportunity here to achieve something. How much work intensity do you expect per week? Well, it's Wednesday evening. It's always from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m, this virtual training, 2 to 3 times a month. And every 8th week you meet. And that's actually really easy to do, even for those who are busy in their professional lives. And there aren't any daily tasks. No, but it depends on what basic requirements you bring with you. But this is also a technical college for middle class, where we have small groups with a maximum of 10 to 15 students per year. No more. Yeah, I heard that from your wife, but that's an illusion, isn't it? Maybe someday we'll have to clone that. That's out of the question, but I just want to say we are still in development, but that's not the end of it. But it's just like that. If we want to train competent physicians or therapists, then I would like to work in smaller groups. You can still build all that instead of taking large groups, because here too individual communication with the student counts. Because this master's thesis, which I presented here, only comes about because the dialogue between me and the students is there. And that's how I imagine it. Your students are your best teachers, ultimately. Yeah, and of course I completely changed my eating habits thanks to Kurt Mozetta. I'm almost vegetarian and have a completely different diet now because I'm simply learning more through this study every day. You see the facts? Yeah. It was a great honour. Thank you very much. And for you, dear viewers, that was Professor Dr. Elmar Wienecke. And well, I have to say, that was a big highlight for me too. To be able to learn something again and to see where the Formula 1 of medicine is and what we actually already, you and I, could consume. There are simply very few channeled ways to access this medicine, but at some point it will also spread across the board, if the lobby allows it, or ultimately many enlightened physicians from complementary medicine also have the knowledge and demand it. And just the right laboratory for this data is obtained and compared in the database. So everything is going well. But if you're concerned at home just about this broadcast, you know where to turn to fill a gap here. With this in mind, thank you again, dear Elmar. Great, totally amazing. My mother already said she's going to set up a studio. The dog joins in too. Of course. I have to think about whether I'll become one of your students. Let's see. I wish you all the best and see you next time.